Perfect. Well, good evening, everyone, or perhaps good morning or good afternoon, depending on where in the world you are dialing in from today. Firstly, a very warm welcome to this free event, but a quick reminder that if you feel inclined to make a small donation towards our conservation efforts, you can do so online at davidshepherd.org. I'm delighted to host today's event with the wonderful Hazel Soan, who for the next hour and a half will be showing us how she uses watercolor to paint wildlife on safari in the African bush. For those of you that are new to the foundation, this event is part of our Art Month in celebration of the 2021 Wildlife Artist of the Year competition. The virtual gallery is open to the public until the 28th of June and features artwork from 200 artists, with 50% of all of these sales going directly towards our conservation projects across Africa and Asia. Art has always been a central pillar to our work here at David Shepherd Wildlife Foundation, not only to raise money, but also to motivate and inspire people to protect the natural world. Whilst many of you dialing in today will be very familiar with Hazel's work, as shown by the almost record-breaking attendance to this webinar today, I thought I'd take a quick moment to introduce her. So Hazel is a British artist who is best known for her wet into wet watercolor approach to painting and her use of rich pigments and strong contrast of light and shade. Hazel draws from African wildlife as a key source of her reference and has not only been a long-time friend of the David Shepherd Wildlife Foundation, but also been a judge of the Wildlife Artist of the Year competition since its inception. Her work is represented in private and public collections worldwide, including the National Portrait Gallery, the Lister Institute, British Embassies in Europe, and the EU delegation in Windhoek. She's also held numerous solo exhibitions in the UK, also in Venezuela, Namibia, Zimbabwe, and appeared on a number of TV shows, including her role as art expert on Channel 4's Watercolor Challenge and hosting her own series, Splash of Colour. The list does go on quite a while, so I'm going to leave some time for Hazel's demonstration. But just a final thing from me and a bit of housekeeping. Please do ask as many questions as you would like by clicking on the Q&A box at the bottom of this Zoom call. I also wanted to let you know that we've got some wonderful prints of Hazel's available on our website, and the links will be posted in the chat. So please do head over to davidshepherd.org after this demonstration. So without any further ado, I am going to hand over to Hazel.
Hi, good evening. Lovely to see, well, I can't see you all, but it's lovely to know you're all there. Now, what I want to show in this brief time we have together is how I paint the animals from life in the bush. Lots of people say, well, but how can you do it? Surely it's not possible, but it is possible. And one of the reasons is that actually animals do stand still or repeat poses a lot more than people realize. And so they're actually, now I'm going to say easier to paint, but they are more possible to paint than many people realize. And so first of all, I just want to show you what I use. Obviously, I'm usually in a 4x4, whether it's an open vehicle with a guided sort of tour, or whether it's my own vehicle. It's going to be a 4x4. And so I need stuff that I can use easily in a vehicle. So one of the things I have is I have a little pot, 3 little water pots. I always use 3 water pots because I like to keep one for clean water and one gets very grubby and one sort of in between. So this, I have to say, is marvelous. It goes on any floor of any vehicle, whatever you are going, up and down, every single bump, and the water in these does not spill out. So that's physics for you. Excellent. I then have a palette of colors like this, and I have a few brushes, but I tend often just to use only one brush. But I vary my brush sizes to suit the size of the watercolor I'm doing, because often, as you'll see as I go along, that it's the brush that determines the size of the picture, because it's either the size of an ear, or it's the size of a horn, or it's the size of a wing, or whatever it is. So for those of you who paint, and I'm sure there's a lot of people watching who paint as well, I think that's kind of useful information. one of the things I love in for the desert, because it is so, things dry really fast in desert landscapes, not so fast obviously in more verdant areas, but I paint a lot in the Kalahari, not obviously elephants because there aren't any there, but because there's no foliage to block the animals. And one of the things that's so nice to be able to paint is the whole animal, because ultimately you'll see from the demonstrations I'm going to do, it is getting the shape. So I use Cardi paper quite a lot, which is quite heavy cotton paper. So it holds the moisture of the paint for longer and gives me longer time to do my wet in wet blends. Now, where I am right now is very humid, so I won't be using that today because it won't dry. I've actually got a hairdryer down here just in case I have to tell you. What I want to show you now is just a few, look at one of these sketchbooks just to give you an idea of how I fill them. So I might do sketches of birds, say, in camp, or there might be a little group of Springbok, a page of hartebeest, even a picture of the Land Rover. Then if one sees a leopard, which one's very lucky obviously when one sees a leopard, and but they hang around, they sit around. Sometimes there's nothing, so it's just grass. African wildcats, which it's great, you can see those very well in the Kalahari. Jackal, which again are quite ubiquitous. Hemsbok, Springbok, I'm going to demonstrate a Springbok, so you'll see how I paint that. Lions have to be sleeping mostly because they're very difficult to paint if they're on the move. And obviously if you want to be close so you can get a face, they've got to be sleeping. More lions, more leopard. Oh, and lion footprints if there's nothing around. So that's the kind of thing I'm filling my pages with. Now, sometimes I do little complete paintings, maybe on different paper, but a lot of the paintings are literally filling sketchbooks, getting to know these animals so that I can become familiar. Now, the first animal I'm going to show you is actually a bird. One of the, let me just show you that way around, sorry. Flamingos are one of my favorite birds to paint. And so I'm going to show you how I go about this. Now, first of all, you have to have an efficiency, I'm going to call it. So I have to think I need as few colors as possible. So in this instance, I've got to have red. So let me show you my palette here so you can see. So red is going to give me the wing and the legs. So then I try to think, can I just have one other color? Because basically, one color is the most efficient, and things like penguins you can sometimes do with one color, but a flamingo can't just be done with red. So I think, right, what goes with red that's going to make the black? And of course, knowing colors obviously, Prussian blue is the ideal companion because the red and the blue together will make a black. So let me show you what I mean in practice. Right. So here we go. Let's have, let's imagine the flamingo is flying, not flying, flapping its wings. So 2 wings that allow for the white at the back. And then rinse that off. And often I do just use one brush and immediately pick up Prussian blue. And I'm picking it up quite neat. I'm not showing you the palette right now. Let me see if I can show you the palette. And I want to get this in while this red is still damp, because this blue will mix with this red and make the black of this wing. And the black of this wing. And then that same blue is now diluted to make the white of the body in shade. So this now comes under the wing. And a little bit more for the underside. And then I've got to move this out of the way now because I need to get the head, the neck and head, neck and head. I can't really, you'll find that I sometimes talk gobbledygook because painting and talking at the same time is not always that easy. Now the head is quite a curious shape with the flamingo. So I've taken the colour almost off my brush, and then I want to come down to make that funny beak shape, which is not quite that. And I'm using the tip of the brush to make the shape. And then back, I've rinsed off my brush again. I'm back picking up the red, because I want the red of these legs. And I think I'm going to end up going off the page. So I'll have to lift the camera in a minute if I do, which I will do. Let me lift up like this. Let me just move the camera a bit higher, then you can see it. Okay, and then we want to make a black for the beak. And if I want to grey any of the underside just a little bit, I can just use that red just gently in there so that I can get a darker underside to the neck. And then finally, I take all the colour off my brush, or maybe I pick up a smaller brush, which is what I've just done here, and I make a black by mixing the two together on the palette. For the little eye, which is about there. So you can see that very quickly, let me come back and talk to you. By using just two colours, I can very quickly make a painting. So now let's see, well, let's do some other birds. Let's do some ostrich. I'll give you the screen again. Right, we'll come down it again. I have to paint these quite so big. Now, ostrich are much blacker, darker, so I need deeper colour. So I often use indigo and sepia. Let me bring you my palette again. So my indigo and sepia. In my palette basically are all the colours that I use regularly. I very rarely use more than 3, 4, 5 colours in a painting. But obviously I use different colours for all different paintings. Now, first of all, just wetting these because they're a little bit dry and I need to get them ready. Because the other thing is obviously the more you're painting, the more ready your palette is in a way. So again, I'm going to start with the useful Prussian blue as my shape to create the ostrich. And the beauty of this method is that as long as I've got the shape in, then once the animal has gone, I still have something to work with. And obviously I've been painting, you know, a lot, so I kind of have some idea of colouring, shape. Well, now, actually, funny enough, shape is what I don't have such a good memory of. That's why I like to get the shape in with a light colour like this. And then I can fiddle around with it until it feels sort of correct. So that's okay, a little bit of shadow on the ground. And then immediately into that, my dark mixture. Which gives me my feathers. And maybe a little bit of alizarin to just tint the legs. Sometimes their legs are pinker than other times. I think it depends if they're in mating mood. But the neck and the legs, they're grey. So putting this little bit of Alizarin Crimson over the top, and then the beak itself is pink as well. So I'll just clean my pink up a little bit to do that. And the tail, again, if they're in mating mood, is orangey. So a little bit of orange tail over the back. Now, if I want to add another, if I want to make a bit more of a painting rather than just painting the individual, I could add something into this. So in other words, once I've got one animal in, it doesn't matter that this isn't a real situation. I can create a group setup. So because I've got composition in a way is something other than just painting from life. You're trying to make a little bit of a painting with it. So here I'm bringing another ostrich into the painting, but of course in real life this wouldn't be at the same time, because you can't be painting two ostrich at the same time and do it that quickly. And this time I'm going to drop that pink in before I do the dark color. One of the beauties of watercolor is that you can go in any which direction. You don't have to do things in any particular order because it's a transparent medium. So in general, you work from light to dark. But the beauty of wet in wet is that I'm dropping colors into a wet wash. So the more I'm dropping color in, the wetter I'm keeping it. And that's the secret really with painting somewhere hot like the desert or anywhere in Africa really, that you've got to keep the watercolor wet. And if it dries, then it's a different method. It's called wet on dry actually, which is a bit sort of obvious, I suppose. But it means that you're going to be building in layers. And the greatest transparency is actually always in that first layer of watercolor, because the watercolor is a transparent film over white paper. It's always a good idea to add a little eye. It's amazing how adding an eye brings an animal to life. Even little quick sketches like these ostrich. Okay, so let's take four-legged animals. Let's see what I've got here.
Hazel, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Sorry, we've had a couple of minor technical glitches, which is why you can't see me right now. But the Q&A, we've already got all sorts of messages coming in from people from Canada and all over the world, and people just saying that, you know, I don't have a comment right now, but I just wanted to say I'm absolutely loving this. So I just wanted to, before I get lost in the Q&A, I just wanted to ask, so there's one question here from Philippa saying, is the water holder a specific brand or something that you've made yourself?
No, it's no specific brand. These were the lids on, well, that was a specific brand, it was Clarins. So that's not an art brand. These were lids on top of, you know, something, a squeegee thing. But, you know, you can find, I was going to say yogurts, but you can't find yogurts that small, but you'll find, you know, all sorts of lids of this size. And this is one of those, I don't know if we can even open now, it's been closed for so long, but it's one of those concertina water pots that are sold in artist shops for hanging on easels. And so they can be deeper or shallower, but I don't ever open it up, which is why it's also so grubby. And then I just plonk those inside. I did try, when we had film, you know, proper film, not digital, the canisters for film were quite good in there, but because they were very light, being light plastic, I had four of them because they wedged, because otherwise they floated and then they fell over. Because what I also do is I don't just put water in these, I put water in this, and that becomes my rinsing area. And then these, because they're so small, are my clean area. So it works very well. I have to say, I'm very pleased with it.
Very clever. And just a couple of other things which have been popping up just around, so lots of people saying, can you tell us the colors that you're using in your palettes? And specifically a lot of people saying, can you tell us what red you're using?
Right, that was cadmium red for the flamingo. That was cadmium red and Prussian blue. Okay, a cadmium red is a fantastic red because it's opaque, so it's very nice and bright and dense. But being opaque is not as transparent. So, mind you, there's not many red animals, so it's not really a problem. But if I was, say, painting a sunset, I might more likely use a quinacridone red, something that's more radiant. But the only bright red I have in my palette is actually the cadmium red. So, but I do carry as well little tubes of paint. Usually they are the same as the ones in my palette for the blues, things like indigo, because if I can't get that deep indigo when I want it, because it's dried hard in the palette, then I want to squeeze it from a tube. And the other was Prussian blue, wasn't it? That was with the flamingo was Prussian, and then the ostrich was Prussian blue again, with a bit of alizarin crimson, and then indigo and sepia mixed together, actually just dropped in, but it was mainly indigo, and a little bit of transparent orange for the orange tail. Okay.
And also I just wanted to mention, because there's another thing which has been asked quite a lot, this is being recorded for anyone who wants to come back and follow certain aspects after it, so it will be made available, so so don't worry if it's going fast or anything like that. Sorry, back over to you and four-legged animals, Hazel.
Yeah, yes, it's a good, I'm glad we're recording it, because it's quite nice to, especially if you're a painter and you're wanting to learn from this, then obviously it's quite nice to be able to replay, because admittedly, you know, I mean, it only take a few minutes to paint, and they have to only take a few minutes to paint, because, you know, unless an animal's actually asleep, it is going to move on. I'm just putting more water in my pot, because that mixture of, one of my pots, that mixture of red and Prussian, you can imagine that that was quite a grubby pot. And one of the things I definitely make sure of is that I have clean color, because I do believe that it is these vibrant colors. You can always make color dirtier, but to keep it absolutely pristine to start with on the white paper is part, I think, of the appeal. I'm going to put back to my overhead camera now so that you can see. I'm going to paint, unless you had any more questions, Theo, that...
Well, last one from me, and this is just, sorry, there was a couple of technical issues with the chat function. So if anyone has any questions or comments, do just use the Q&A function, which we are now monitoring. So sorry if there was any, like a little period of time where you couldn't contact us.
Hopefully they haven't all left. Right, now we're going to deal with herd animals, because one of the beautiful things about herd animals is that if one moves on, the others are there for you to carry on with. So I'm going to paint a Springbok, because when I'm painting Springbok, I literally drive up beside the herd, and then I go along with, because they're moving very slowly usually as they're grazing, and I follow them sort of foot on first gear, and I might get this much done. So this is, say, the back of a Springbok from one, and then I might be looking at another one for getting the front leg, and then I might look at another one, because they're all going in the same direction. Well, so long as you don't pick the ones not going in the same direction. And that's something I learned very early on, is don't pick the one that's not following the herd, because you haven't got any more of them. They're all, animals are very predictable. The more time you spend with them, the more you realize that they stick to times. They're quite, you can sort of, I now can sort of know when they're all about to move on. It's amazing how you get used to their habits. Again, this is Kalahari. Now you'll notice that I'm using a blue and a bit of yellow ochre that was there. Sorry, I didn't say the colors, because I want to get the cool and the warmth of this lovely creature. And I often play with cool and warm colors. So warm colors are the reds and the yellows, and the cooler colors are blue. But anyone who knows about painting will also know that there are cool blues and there are warm blues. So it's not just a matter of the hue. But in this case, it is a matter of the hue, because I'm using the blue to be the underside, which is where the Springbok is white. And I'm using the yellow to be the top side, where the Springbok is that gorgeous honey, for a painter it's burnt sienna, but that sort of honey brown. And the other thing also is that I find a little bit of shadow, even if you can't really see it because they're in the grass or whatever, a little bit of shadow grounds an animal. So it's really quite a good idea to find the shadow or to guess the shadow in the grass or the ground or whatever they're on. Now I'm coming in with let me bring my palette across again. Burnt sienna. And I can be stronger now. I'm quite pale in my first wash, which that would probably have been, probably 3 or 4 Springbok would have been used to paint this one Springbok. Now this is the hide colour. So now this is the local colour. And with anyone who knows the Springbok knows it's got this lovely stripe. It's going to come across here in a minute. And I'm going to put the stripe in now, I think. Right, this is, I'm using ultramarine blue now. I used Prussian blue for the flamingo and for the ostrich. Now this is ultramarine, and ultramarine and burnt sienna mix to make beautiful black. But first of all, we need the brown of this stripe. Now, because this is going into wet paint, this color must be much drier. So can you see how wet that is? And now see how dry this is. One thing I think people who don't paint don't realize is that the reason the palette is made to slope, and you can see it here, you see the slope of the palette, is so that the water runs down and out of it, so that you have control over the, sorry, I don't want black at the minute, I'm getting distracted talking about palettes. I need brown, don't I, for this stripe? So the palette, the slope of the palette is there for a reason. It's there so that the colour runs down and out of your washes, so that you can make dry colour if you want it, or big wet washes if you need more paint. So it's not sort of a coincidence. Everything in watercolour is designed for a reason. Now for the horns, or for the ears, let's do the ears first. You'll see what I mean by the size of the brush. Look at this. This is exactly ear shaped. Look at that. That is ear shaped, isn't it? Exactly the size of an ear. So that just press the brush down for the ear and come the other way and just press the brush that way. And then the little black eye and the little black nose. Oh, they're so beautiful. And now I want this color to be a little bit dry because the horn is rigid. So I'll try the sort of lyre-shaped horns, try to make, oh, good, it's broken up. It doesn't always happen what you want to happen on the paintings. And I don't, if it doesn't work how I want it, I never blame it. I just accept whatever it does, because watercolor is so beautiful. Now, frankly, I'd be perfectly happy if that's all I do, but if I want to just deepen where there's shadowy sides, I can bring this in while it's still wet, bring this in a bit down here. But I actually find, I like the freshness. I like the sort of, what's the word? The sort of, the immediacy of the fresh watercolor. So I tend not to try and overwork them. I might drop a bit of shadow in, say, under a leg here, but I wouldn't want to, I don't want it all to look too finished, if you know. Now I want the life of the brushstroke. Let's imagine we're still running alongside this herd, and let's now take a Springbok who is munching some grass. Let's have it. So again, same principle, and it'll give me a chance to show you again. So neck coming up from the ground, and we'll have them same size. So once again, the beauty of using a pale colour like this ochre, just as my first colour, enables me to find the shape of the Springbok without getting myself into any trouble. Because if it wasn't working, if I didn't feel the shape was like any kind of Springbok, then I just dab it off and then I just start again. And it's not going, you know, it won't matter if it's underneath another Springbok. So everything is done. I'm a great believer in, I make things as safe as possible, because watercolor is scary enough as it is. However much you love it, it's got that adrenaline rush, which is, I think, what one of the things I love about it. So now we've probably only needed 2 Springbok for this, because it's a more static pose, because the animal is leaning down and they tend to munch away for ages. Again, I'm coming in with my blue as my underside, which is effectively white in shadow. And it doesn't matter, this can go across this yellow because it's going to be deeper and darker once I put the hide colour on. So this is still just the shape of the Springbok being created. So I'm still in a safety mode, really, because basically if it goes wrong, if it doesn't feel like a Springbok, if the shape's all wrong, I can still take this off. Now here, I'm going to just show you that also if I want to deepen the colouring because of shadow, this is where I can also bring the blue across that yellow before I add my burnt sienna. Now my burnt sienna is coming in. Let's try and get the palette in the picture if I can. And a little bit drier, that's it. And we don't want it to go right around the neck because they've got white on the underside of the neck, up and over the top of the torso, down the outside of the legs, just on the front, and a little bit of the tail, a little bit on the front here. And now we're back to our lovely stripe.
Hazel, just one thing which is being asked quite a lot throughout is just what type of brushes are you using, and what size are they?
Oh, right. Yes, that's a very, very good question. I should have been telling you because that's very important. They're all sable brushes. I'm a lover of sable brushes because hair, the natural hair, holds more water than a nylon brush because there's barbs in hair. And not only that, because the barbs hold the hair, hold the water, sorry, not the hair, it's up to you, it's the artist has the chance to release the pressure, what am I trying to say? By pressing down, I am the one in control of releasing more or less water. So I'm in control of this gravitational pull of water coming out of a brush. I always work flat on my lap or up against the steering wheel. If I'm driving, then I work at a slight angle because the steering wheel effectively becomes the sort of easel with which I'm against. But by choice, I like to work flat because then you can always pick it up to tilt it. But I know what's sort of going to happen. If it's flat, I know that gravity is not going to take it in any direction other than the one I'm painting it in. So I'm just trying to think how this little fellow is going to be munching the grass. What was I saying? So now I've lost my thread. Suddenly I was thinking about Springbok munching grass. Where am I now? Let me think. Hang on, what were you asking, Thea? I've completely lost the thread.
We were asking about the types of brushes, the sizes of brushes, but also the sizes and weight of paper.
Oh, everything. Okay. Oh, this is great. Oh, I love all these questions. Right. Okay. So size of brushes. So the brushes are sable. Yes, I knew we were talking about something important. So the brushes are sable, and this is a size 8. And the other one I was using for, I think it was the Flamingo, was a size 10. Don't tend to use smaller than size 8. I do sometimes use bigger than size 10. I find that I'd rather use a bigger brush with a good tip, because you see here with this 10, even though it's got a huge body holding a huge amount of water, it's still got a fine tip. So I can still, sorry, let me get it in focus for you. I can still paint, say, a Springbok bigger than this, but basically, as I said before, it's size. I realized with this flamingo, we were going off the page, so I've had to come down to a size 8. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to see these pictures. But you see, let me show you the size, because you probably can't imagine. This is about 6 inches high, okay? So if I were to use the size 10, I'd end up with much bigger Springbok. If I use the size 8, then because of the size of the ear, because of the way the brush goes, this is a size I end up with. So if I'm on a smaller sketchbook, say I was working on something, say I was working on a smaller book, say this size, smaller, then I might go down to a size 6 because I don't want something to be too big. So the brush, I choose the brush by the size of the painting I'm trying to make. Let's come back and answer this face to face. So basically, the brush determines the size of the picture. And now that was that question, wasn't it? Yeah. Have I answered that?
Yes, very, very well. Another one I've got here. Sorry, there are so many questions coming in. I think we're having hellos from Germany, England, USA, New Zealand. We've got 250 odd participants. And yeah, the Q&A is, we've got a lot of questions coming in, so I won't be able to ask every single one, but just a really good one here, just around, are you currently painting from any reference, or are these animals just something that you've got in your head? And also, how does it differ in terms of you doing it in the studio now, in terms of actually being out in the African bush and painting?
Well, what I'm trying to show you is how I paint in the African bush. So in a way, I do tend to paint in the studio in a similar way, because I mostly paint out, you know, I travel a lot and I like to paint outside. So in a way, when I get back in the studio, unless it's much bigger, which of course makes a difference, although I still use the same principles. So what I'm trying to show you is exactly how I paint it. If I was in a 4x4 vehicle in the middle of the bush, this is how I paint. So this is what I'm trying to get across, is that it is possible, because watercolor is such a fast medium, and because watercolor, let me come back to the Springbok to use this example, because watercolor, oh, hang on, wrong camera, sorry. Because with watercolor, you can blend colors so quickly, it's possible to paint animals that are well, either static or on the move, because it's such a fast medium. And so what I'm showing you is, what I'm trying to show you is how I would paint on safari and what I would paint on safari. Where I seem to keep forgetting the questions when they come in.
That was how it differs. But actually this question is, I think this links in very much into kind of how it's different in the studio. But this one is a question from, oh, and now I've lost it. It was from Sue, but just around, yeah, here we go. Sue Demlo, how do you keep the paper wetter when you're in Africa? Was it a different kind of paper that you're using?
Well, that's what I was trying to explain at the start. It was that, let me just, it says Cardi sketchbook here. This Cardi paper is, it's different. If you can see, can you see, this is a normal 100% cotton paper, and it's 300 grams. And because it's quite humid here, this is slower to dry. Now, normally, I'm used to hotter drying. I'm used to things drying faster. Because I'm working out in the heat. And so this paper, I don't know if you can see the textures. I can't want a blank sheet in here, but can you see, it's rougher. I don't know if you can see, it's a rougher paper, and it's made with long fiber cotton. And as a result, it keeps the paper wetter, it keeps the paint wetter longer. And so it enables me to, sorry, I'm just coming back. I was just trying to come this. So it enables me to do my wet in wet for a longer period. But I mean, the truth is, these are very fast pictures. And for me, I prefer it drying fast. It's really how I learned to paint. Because I was learning to paint in the bush, in the African bush, I had to devise a method of painting fast. And so that is actually how I became a wet in wet watercolorist, because basically I had to keep the paint wet and keep delivering. And so I learned to start with my paler washes to get the shape. But then because I'm putting in the blue, when I'm done doing that, I'm adding water in. And then when I'm putting in the brown, when I'm talking about the Springbok again here, so let's go back to the Springbok. So when I'm putting in the brown, I'm adding water in again. And so actually I am keeping the painting wet. And that's really the secret with wet in wet. And so if you can actually see that the stripe here went in when it was a bit too wet, I would rather that stripe had not spread so much, but it's wetter than if I'm in the bush. So I'm kind of, I was sort of surprised because I was thinking I was in the bush and the paint spread further. So in this one, I came in with slightly drier paint so that it didn't spread quite so far. So can I now go on to painting some elephants?
Yes, please do.
Right, let me just get some more paper.
We've also got hello from Kenya. And just a couple of, so I think a few people have joined a little bit late, and I know you were on it, but just in terms of the brand of paper that you're using and its weight, I know you touched on it briefly earlier.
Right. Well, the main paper I use for painting is actually Saunders Waterford, and I'm very lucky. I've got a brand now made with my name. This is Saunders Waterford cotton paper. I always use cotton paper because cotton paper is made, for those of you who don't know about watercolor paper, paper is either made with watercolor paper is either made with cotton, it used to be made with linen, but that's very hard to come by now, or it's made with wood pulp. And cotton paper enables colors to blend in a more, in a more even way than wood pulp. And you can kind of imagine that because if you think of wood pulp, it's little bits, isn't it? And if you think of cotton and getting your clothes sort of, moisture on your clothes, it spreads more evenly. The sketchbooks that I was showing you, this is Cardi Paper. It's a paper that's made in India from long fiber cotton, and it's a wonderful sustainable industry. It's made from old t-shirts, long fiber cotton from old t-shirts, and they do all sorts of papers for other use other than artists, but they make their white paper when their water is clean. So the artist paper is made when the water's clean. And then they obviously have to bleach some of the t-shirts, I presume, to get the color back to white. And then they make their colored papers once they got the dirty water. So it's a sort of fantastic sustainable economy going on there. Presumably, I don't know, I think Cardi just means cotton, I think. That's the paper. If anyone wants, there's so.
And another one, I can't even keep up with the amount there coming in, but just the last one here before I'll let you go on to the elephants, because obviously I know that's what a lot of people are very excited about. But just the brand of paints that you're currently using.
Right, I use Schminker. The important thing with paint is to get to know your colours. So not to have too many, and not to, it doesn't help brands if I say don't buy too many paints, but the thing is, you need to be familiar with the colours, because the beauty of proper artist brands colours is that Schminker, every single Prussian blue tube of paint will be exactly the same colour, exactly, so that I know exactly what's going to be delivered to this paper when I take it, because you've got to know, because I've got to know that colour and the red make black, and I want to know the consistency. It is all about familiarity of the material, so that you are an efficient deliverer of mixing to the paper. So Schminker is the colours that you're seeing me use.
Thank you. And then there's people in the comments saying also your books are fantastic on these topics. So people can always go there as well.
That's good to hear. It's always nice to know. But I must admit, I do like writing about painting, I suppose. I love sharing it. It gives me such a wonderful life. I like sharing it. So Right, shall we paint some elephants?
I think that's a great idea.
Right, so back to the white paper. Right, now my method of painting elephants has sort of become a sort of a bit iconic, I think. There seems to be YouTube videos all over the place. But basically, it's the same principle I was using for the Springbok, and I had to find a way of painting elephants as they were walking, because the thing is, elephants don't stand still for very long. And although they're a herd animal, it's very rare that they're all the same. I mean, they're all different sizes, for one thing. So I used, what I tended to do was I would drive alongside an ambling elephant so that I am broadside to it. And they don't, they're very amiable if you're, not threatening them in any way, by blocking their path. So they will amble along beside you, and I would just be basically, I suppose, in first gear, going along, and I would get the shape in a pale yellow ochre first, so not dissimilar from the Springbok colour to start with. I found any yellow will do, but the combination I used to use a lot, and still do use a lot, is yellow ochre, and then I'll show you what happens next. Right, so let's imagine we have, I want to do, let's do a couple of Ellies. So let's have an Ellie ambling along, and a couple of tusks here. Now, the other thing I did discover quite early on, that being right-handed, it was easier for me if the head was this side. And it was a sort of a revelation to me when I realized I couldn't understand why I was always choosing to paint animals in the same direction. And then I realized it was because I'm right-handed. And it's easier to start with a head than it is to start with a bottom. It's quite simple, isn't it, really, when you think about it? But I didn't realize what I was doing until I tried to paint animals going the opposite direction. And I think I realized what I was up to. So same principle here, getting the shape in, nice pale color, so that if it all goes wrong shape, I can change it. And you can see the way I'm using my brush is I'm sort of seeing the shape as I go. I'm trying to imagine that I'm walking along beside an elephant, and I always make a point of knowing where my ground is, because it's easy to lose your way when you're painting in sort of, what's the word? You're painting in patches, aren't you? I'm sort of painting the head. I'm then painting the ear area, and then painting the leg, then painting the front leg. The bulk of an elephant is so huge that the tone's going to change from the top here, which is going to be lighter, down to the underside, which is going to be much darker. So you can see I'm sort of finding my way with the shape of the elephant. I'm trying to imagine that I'm driving along beside this lovely creature. And sometimes you might not have the legs in exactly, not going to say the wrong order, but I mean in terms of which one is right and left. But what I'm looking at is I look at the gaps underneath, I look at the spaces underneath. So it doesn't matter which is the front one or a back one at this stage, because I'm looking at the gaps underneath to get the gait, to get the pose. Now, as soon as I've got that shape in and I feel it feels like the elephant, then I'm not so worried now if the elephant disappears, because I have now painted so many elephants that I kind of know what to do now with this elephant. But originally, obviously, I still needed the elephant alongside me, and still obviously prefer to have the elephant alongside me. But the other thing is that if you're, say, at a waterhole and the elephants are hanging around for ages, you've got quite a bit of time to catch them. Now, I want to talk to you while I don't want to talk about something else while I'm just putting the pink in, because I want to say, so now the next colour that goes in is Alizarin Crimson. Now, so it's going to look like a pink elephant now, and you're all going to think, my goodness, what's she doing? She's gone mad. But bear with me. So pink goes in, and basically all over the same shape, but I am aware of the tone. So in other words, do you see I'm leaving light at the top here so that I can get this bulk of this elephant is very important. Their volume is hugely important to their shape. And now I am going to come with my blue, which is Prussian blue. And the reason the Prussian blue is good is because, remember, the flamingo red and a cold blue, a greeny blue, will go towards a grey, go towards a black, in this case of the flamingo. And so I want this colouring now to go towards grey. Now it's still going to look very blue on your screen, but as it dries, so the colours settle down, they're not quite so bright when watercolour dries, and it will go to grey. We'll see it, we'll make sure we've got time for it to see it. Well, otherwise I guess get the hairdryer out, which I wouldn't have in the bush. So now I'm dropping this in, and you see I'm not going right up to the top, because again, I want to get the feeling of the bulk of this elephant. So while this colour is going in, I'm also aware of the form. And now just deepen the shadow a little bit. And sometimes if they're kicking up a bit of dust, I'll put a little bit of, I'll let the, take a little bit of that yellow, a bit of dust in to follow them along. Now comes the important bit. Now let's bring my palette in. This is nice and wet because there's three colors on there. Now I need a nice deep color because I now need to make the detail. So this red, the same thing, the Alizarin Crimson, the Prussian blue, and a tiny bit of yellow ochre so that I don't make it too yellowy. And now this is where I can create the detail. And this is when I do want to be back beside the elephant if I can be. And which, so because this is the kind of thing that I probably wouldn't remember so clearly if the elephant had gone out of view. But because I have painted so many elephants, I kind of have much more idea of what to expect. But you can see that this is now bringing in the detail and find the position of the eye. Lovely ear folds, deep dark under the ear. The haunch behind the haunch now. So now this is when I want to know which leg is forward and which leg is back. And this is the only time then I need to know. And so, but it's a very quick moment. So, you know, it's not difficult to watch the elephant. I don't have to be actually painting at the time of watching the elephant. I just need to see what's happening and then transpose it to my painting.
Hazel, whilst you're painting, I just wanted to read one quick comment and then just a question about this. But from Jacqueline, just saying, you're so enthusiastic about watercolor, which is why I stuck with it. It hasn't been easy at times, but like you say, that's the beauty. You want to experience all that medium has to offer. Thank you for getting me hooked.
Oh, I went goosebumps when she said that. Oh, that's lovely.
And another one from Carla. I'm saving a lot of the big questions for the Q&A at the end, but just any tips on how to get the proportions and the form right as quickly as you do? Thank you.
Observation. It's always observation. It's observation, it's familiarity, it's practice. What can I say? That's the tip. Basically, the more you do it, the more you get familiar. Proportions. It's observation. It is just observation, actually. One of the things I have realised that usually it's better to lengthen legs. So better to have an ostrich with longer legs, or a flamingo with longer legs, or a springbok with longer legs, even an elephant with longer legs, than shorter legs. So if in doubt, lengthen the legs. Better to have a smaller head. So there are things that you learn with practice that are better to err on. Yeah, I guess that's what I can say about proportion, about getting proportions. I'm going to put a little baby behind this one because then I'm going to bring in a background behind so that you can see how I would bring in background. If you see to bring in background, the elephant needs to be light. Right, hang on. Either with background, I have to have the creature, I have to paint the background first and then the creature on top darker, because you can't really add a background if you haven't thought about it beforehand. Now, in this case, I have deliberately left this lighter here because I want to bring the background round it in a minute. But I'm just going to put a little baby in the same principle, so you can just see that going again. Can you see this is going grey? Can you see it's moving away from being that bluey colour and it's going grey? And so it might look a bit brighter on the screen, but it's going nicely grey, and it's still keeping these lovely blends of colour that watercolour does. So you can carry on asking me questions while I paint my little Ellie, because obviously we've had the principle of it, so it's going to be the same.
Okay, well that's a great time to kind of pick up on some of these other ones. So first one, do you ever draw the animals before you paint them?
No. Not when Now, you'll notice that all the animals I'm painting, you probably didn't notice, but you may have noticed, are side views, because a side view is a definite shape. And the easiest way to paint animals from life is to get that shape, because then if the animal moves, you can, to some extent, guess the form from the light and shade by where the sun is, etc. So if you've got the shape in, if you paint an animal coming towards you, the shape is quite bizarre, isn't it? If you can imagine, we haven't really haven't shown something, so I can't show you exactly, but so basically I tend to choose animals, I tend to paint them from the side. It's another thing that I didn't realize I was doing until I looked at all the pictures and thought, oh, they're all profiles, they're all side views. And then I realized, of course they are, because that's something that I can get and hold with my brush and see. Whereas if an animal's coming from the front and they move off, I can't work out what on earth I've got there. I've just got a big blob on the paper and I wouldn't be able to work it out. Whereas with a side view, you can tell what your animal is, you can tell if it still looks like an animal, you can tell if it's worth carrying on the watercolor. Now, what was your question again? I always keep forgetting. I go off at a tangent and I forget your question. What was it?
Not at all. It was whether you ever use a pencil.
Oh yeah, no. So there's no time to both draw and paint that kind of image, because basically I don't need to, for one thing, because I can get the shape with this, here I have the shape of my baby Ellie with the brush. If it's awful, I can just get a bit of tissue and just wipe the whole thing off because it's so pale. So I don't need to draw. If it is a more confused, that's what I knew I was getting to something. If it is a more complex pose, in other words, coming towards me, or say a lion's head, because I paint a lot of sleepy lions. And again, if you imagine that just as a blob, it's sort of just a triangle and I wouldn't have a clue what to do with it. So I might well, if I'm painting a lion, in case they're going to move, do a drawing beforehand and then put the watercolor in. So it really depends. If I think I can get what I need without a pencil, if I can't, then I will use a pencil. But this method of painting, I have discovered, is quicker than drawing first and then adding pencil. And it's more charming because there's no pencil mark to obscure the watercolor. Pencil marks are lovely. I'm not against pencil marks, but what tends to happen if you have a pencil mark is that you tend to work inside it. You tend to use it as a contour. And the beauty of watercolor is often the edges. I mean, the edges of watercolor are, gorgeous. Look at these edges. I mean, don't they just make you want to lick it? So really, if you don't need a pencil, no point to use one. Pencil's a guide for watercolor. If you don't need the guide, don't use it. If you do need it, I will use it. So, I'm not a purist. I'm a greedy painter who just wants to paint the world, and as fast, sort of things that move as fast as possible. But as soon as I finish painting them, I want to paint them again. I can't. I've never ever had enough. I've never ever satisfied. I just want to keep on painting. So
On that note, Hazel, I've got just a couple of quick comments. Just Hazel, this is from Darlene. Hazel, your work is hypnotizing. I'm so inspired. Hi Hazel, not really a question. I just wanted to say this elephant looks utterly charming. Great work.
Oh, thank you.
And then this one's more of a question. I'm really loving these transparent, clean colors. This is from Marnell. I use a lot of Daniel Smith granulating pigments. Do you have a brand that you use most often?
Yes, Schminke is my main brand, and that's a German brand. I used to use a lot of Winsor & Newton, and still occasionally some colors, I still use, but it's quite good to get to stick with a brand. A lot of American painters use Daniel Smith because they're very well supplied with them out there, and they're lovely colors. Daniel's, all these proper paint manufacturers that make artist colors. It's not really the brand, it's having the artist colors. I love Schminke because I've fallen in love with them as colors, and I trust the brand because they're so they're so consistent. But that's probably, likewise for lots of other brands as well. And certainly Daniel Smith are a very fine brand. I find them a little bit runny. So for me, because I'm picking up a palette like this very quickly, I want a palette that I can fold up like that and throw into a paint bag that won't run. And I did try some Daniel Smith. I found them a bit runny, but that's not a downside, because it might be useful in another occasion. But as I say, I'm using Schminke and love them. But the important thing is to use artist pigment, because this is not cheap paint is dye, and dye is not pigment, and it's precipitated onto clay to make it into a pigment for paint, but it isn't the same as using these real pigments. This is real pigment. This pigment will last forever. This pigment, in the old days, watercolors faded because a lot of the pigments weren't, a lot of the colors were made with plants like indigo, or Indian yellow was made with the urine from cows fed on mangoes. So, that they were colors that could fade because they weren't light fast. Now, most of the colors are either made from carbon, and strangely enough, we have the car trade to thank for that, because in the 1950s, when they were trying to make colors for cars, they had to be waterproof, weatherproof, lightproof, and so a lot of these paint manufacturers perfected the carbon colors that came out of oil. And so, oil is black, but black comes from red, yellow, and blue, as we have seen with this elephant mix, this black mix here from our yellow ochre, Alizarin Crimson, and Prussian blue. So pigments have come a long way. We now have vastly more pigments than our fellow artists had 100 years ago, or even 70 years ago. The 50s was a major breakthrough. And what I find amusing is that some of the colors they called, what did they call? They called, I think it was Winsor & Newton, called sap green permanent. They made green from carbon colors, and its chemical name was all too complicated. So they called it permanent sap green because it was permanent, and permanent rose. And then acrylic paint started, and they called them after the chemical colors. And suddenly they realized that artists could perfectly well deal with quinacridone red and quinacridone gold and things. They'd had Viridian and cerulean and alizarin all their lives. They were not afraid of long words. And so mostly nowadays colors are called by what the pigment is. So as the artist what you're dealing with, and so what its property is. So if somebody says, I've got quinacridone red, I know that red is made from carbon. I know it is very fine pigments, and I know it's transparent. If they say I've got cadmium red, I know that cadmium red is made from cadmium. Cadmium is a metal. It's dense, it's opaque. So the name tells you what the pigment's going to do on the paper. It's magic, I can tell you, it's magic. Oh, everyone should do watercolor, it's magic. Right, now, I want to bring about, Theo, any other question? Because this is actually just could do with a few seconds more to dry before I put the background in.
Well, lots, you'll be pleased to hear, but this is a good one for now. You're leaving the white paper in places. This is from Karen Whittle. How do you decide where to leave it white? Also, are all your soft edges within the animal, or do you do soft edges at the edge of the animal? Edge of outline.
The sort of soft edges here, isn't there? The sort of the dust is soft, but really the light is left. I'm going to be bringing, the light is left where the light is. Now, I'm going to be bringing a background in behind these elephants. And so to be able to bring a background in, there needs to be light here so that the darker background can bring out the light, and so that there's not a conflicting tonal, no, I need to go backwards first of all. Basically, the only way you see anything on a flat piece of paper is through different tones. And it's not the color that counts, it's actually the tones, the darks and lights. That tells you whether something's in front of something or other. It tells you whether something's lit or in shadow. So these, when this Ellie shape was just yellow, it was a shape, wasn't it? But it wasn't a form. Now we have graded them from here to here, and we have put this dark color in, which has graded them within the shape. And so we have effectively suggested that form exists on this flat piece of paper, not in a way that we could pick them up and hold this elephant, but in a, in a beautiful watercolor painterly way. So where I leave white is where there is light, and therefore the way to show the lightest tone with watercolor is the white paper. Now, I'd be quite happy to leave this without even a background, because I love white paper as a background. And most of my sketchbooks, as you noticed from the ones I just showed you, a lot of them are just, they have no background. But I want to show you how to bring background in, because it's nice to be able to make a painting in a setting sometimes. So if you've got any other vital question, I'll answer it. Otherwise, I'll do the background. No, I'm not going to, because it'd be good to get to the Q&A at some point today. So I was I'm going to collate all of the amazing comments saying you're magical, you're magic, you're amazing, I love your passion, and I will put them into a document and send them to you at the end. Oh, I could do it.
The only other one, Hazel, is just when does Hazel use hot pressed paper?
Oh, when does Hazel use hot pressed paper? Hardly ever. Hardly ever. I have used it sometimes, but it gives a whole different feel, and it's very rare. It's very rare that I want that look. I tend to use it if I want to do figures with hard edges, and sort of what happens on hot press paper is you get those lovely blobby, instead of the color blending like this, you'll get blobby blends, which is lovely. It's another lovely look of watercolor. It's all, everything about watercolor is divine. But mostly I want to do wet in wet to get the form. And so I tend not to. I might use hot press for flowers if I want to paint flowers. I sometimes use it for figures, but paper's heavy. And because I travel a lot and I'm carrying paper, I tend to carry the paper I know I'm going to be most comfortable with. And so it does tend to be, oh, I didn't tell you surface, rough paper. Sorry, I didn't tell you that when I was telling you about the paper. I tend to use rough paper. So the other question, if somebody's going to ask, is, do you ever use knot paper? And knot is cold pressed paper. It's called knot because it's not rough. That is slightly less textured than rough, and more textured than hot press, for anybody who wants to know all the details. Okay. Thank you. Right, I'm going to bring in the background now. I just want to, and we can have any more questions in a minute, but I just want to just to concentrate. So now, in the bush, this would have dried very fast. So I wouldn't actually hardly have needed a gap of time before bringing the background behind the elephant. So when the yellow was going on here, I could use that same brush of yellow to bring my background in. Because we've got high humidity here, I have to wait, because we don't want the whole shape disappear, you know, what's the word, bleeding into the background. But the beauty of hot weather is not that it makes watercolor harder. It makes watercolor more efficient in a way, because I have control how wet the paper is, and it will dry quickly. So I'm not waiting around. So you can get a lot more painting done on a hot, dry day in the desert than you can sitting here inside. So don't think of fast drying times as a downside. They are not. They are actually an upside to watercolor painting. So I'm bringing this round the ellie. I'm leaving a little bit of light on top at the on the front side there. This is going to be a bank of trees behind or something, but again, nice and loose. This is the, I've picked up my bigger brush. Sometimes, I forgot to tell you, yes, sometimes I use a flat brush like this. Sorry, here we go. So let's just use that, because that's very often what I do, because it gets the color, it can lay the color really fast, and it's highly efficient. And again, over the back. And then into that goes the blue to make our green. So to start with, nice and pale. But already this is now darker than our ellie. So we have a few, and we want it, let's have it darker behind. I'm going to actually mix the yellow with the blue to bring it darker behind the ellie. Oh no, I don't want it darker there. I want it light. No, light dark. Okay, let's have a gap of light there and dark here, because I'm contrasting dark against light. So where there's light on the ellie, I can have the darker color, and where there's dark. So make this a little bit different coloring. We don't want it all to look the same. Let's have a bit more yellow ochre over here. And then let's contrast a bit more against here. So in other words, darks against lights, lights against darks, always a good combination in watercolor. And then back to a fine brush, and I'm actually going to use a rigger. This is a very fine brush, a long haired brush, and I'm going to use my dark color that we did for the ellie's detail to bring in some nice African tree branches behind. And you see they're just spreading into the wash. But because I'm using a fine line, they're not going too far because there's not too much paint. If I were to use the round brush, then we would have, you know, the color might spread too far. Like we did with the remember the Springbok stripe, it just went too far. By using a rigger, I can control, because there's basically not very much paint on here. Maybe we'll make it a darker bush here, you know, because we can make this brush do other things other than just lines. And we'll just hint at another bit. Lots of watercolor is about suggestion largely as well. You know, it's that suggestion, and then basically you do all the rest of it. You know, the viewer finishes off the painting for you, really, or for me rather, I should say. Let's just make a little bit of darker color under the tree there, but really we don't need much more than that. It's given us a background to the elephants, and then now I'm just going to pick up a little bit of the red to make, oh dear, I picked up way too much red there, sorry. Okay, a little bit of the red with a bit of the blue to make a mauve, because we haven't used much sort of mauve, and let's just have I think maybe something here, just so we got a bit of different colouring. Maybe we can make that, maybe we can, what should we do? A little bit around here? I don't think we need to. We don't want to. And just a little bit of different colouring in here, because just these three colours can give you a whole range of colours, can't they? Now, I've just noticed. Just see how this has got a bit triangular. So that might bother me. Now, if I can get it before it dries, I can push this back because it's still wet. I come from the clean side and I'm using a brush. I'm just using the rigger because it was in my hand, but basically I've taken the colour off my brush and I'm just pushing it from the clean side. I can't go from that side because obviously I would take the colour of the trees into. So I can just reshape my elephant bottom, and then it doesn't matter if it goes further because I can always bring back a bit of background, but at least I've got back the roundness of the elephant's bottom. And then let's take the foreground and we'll use that flat brush again, because the beauty of the flat brush is it's not carrying a huge amount of paint. If you look at I'm glad you all asked about the brushes. I'm so sure because I love talking about this kind of stuff. Let me hold them still for you. So that carries a lot of water in there. Remember I said about the barbed hairs. This is thinner, so it doesn't carry so much. So even though it looks like a big brush, it's carrying it, but it'll deliver it all from that end, and it's not carrying it in the body. So it's going to deliver, it's not going to deliver loads of water held up here. While that was drying, I just want to put a little bit, I want to bring a wash across here. I just can still see this is still slightly damp, so I'm just waiting a little bit longer. So I'm just going to also show, supposing I want to push some colour back into these trees. So if this hasn't quite dried, I can just get my brush and I can just push, I can work this colour back. So it doesn't have to be the damp, oh, I've got a brush hair there. Hairs. Brushes shouldn't be delivering hairs, you know, they shouldn't be falling out. These brushes are very fine brushes, but occasionally they do. So you can see one can actually shape, so I can get, you know, if I don't want that line, I can get rid of it. You can do, people think watercolour is unforgiving, but while it's wet, it's very forgiving. Perhaps I don't want that one. So, you know, you should never be afraid of it. It's, once you realise that you're in control, if I want to spread this colour here, you know, I can bring this, you know, you can do all sorts of things. If you do it gently, and if you introduce too much water, then you will create a background. So I don't really want to go and splash a whole load of water in here, but we could just show you. If I just do, like, this is just, I'm just picking up, here's my water pot. I'm just picking up just water. So this is clean water. And we'll push it in from down. Where should we put a background? We'll put a little background here. Now just watch. Can you see that water spreading? You should be able to see that water spreading. Now backgrounds are quite nice in themselves because they create lovely edges. Can you see that? Yes. Oh, look at it. It's gorgeous, isn't it? I love it. So let's put another little one there. And let's make it a bit less, they're sometimes called cauliflowers, but they basically, you can determine, you can be in control of this beautiful medium, because you're the one, you know, you're the one delivering. You know, it's not, doesn't have to be scary. And if you did that by mistake, look, dry brush, push that back, push those pigments back, just very gently. Not. You got to think of these little pigment particles like pixels on a screen. They're tiny. All these are tiny pigment particles, and they don't want to be pushed around. But they don't mind if you just carefully look after them. You know, they're happy. Right, let's put this foreground in because I think we need to have our question time. All right, so
I'm just going to let you know that we've got 10 minutes left.
Oh, right, hang on, let me just run across I can just, now it's all nice and dry. Right, so just yellow ochre right across. The reason I wanted to bring this in is because I want to show you, you go across, because this is dry, I can go right across. I don't have to be going round these legs. I can go right across. This is the beauty of a transparent medium. I can keep it stronger in the foreground. And take it right across, but of course it has to be dry, and that's why I didn't want to go over it, because otherwise it would be running. So that worked very nicely timing wise, even so we could do that nice little background then. Look how beautiful, you see, I love backgrounds. And then even into things like that, we can add tiny little bits of grass, because this stuff just does it all for you. It's just, I mean, it's just, ugh, it's watercolor, you know. Look, grass, I mean, for goodness sake. Right, we can have questions now. Oh, I know, let's just make that dust. Oh, no, I think it's dust. This dust can be just dusty. Oh, I don't want to stop painting. Right, maybe ask me some questions while I just put a bit of dust here.
Thanks, Hazel. Yeah, I mean, we've got so many that I'm just going to have to pick out just a few of the highlights, and I will, of course, send all of the other questions over to you just after this call, because we've just been kind of inundated, and I think that's testament to you. But just one here. So, Hazel, how's your approach and technique to painting wildlife changed over the years?
Oh, that's a really good question now. That's going to take the rest of the time to think about this one. I trust the medium one. Yeah. I think when I was younger, I didn't realize that watercolor knows what it's doing. And now, you know, I say things now like, let the brush do the work. And people say, but it's not, it's you doing it. And I know it's that, but I have much more confidence in believing that if I just do a swoosh, watercolor will deliver. Yes, that's going to be my hand being more confident, I agree. I fractured my wrist in 2010, and I had quite a few commissions I had to finish. And so I painted with my left hand, thinking I wouldn't be able to, because I'm very right-handed. And I was astonished that the brush is such a good instrument. It's so precision, such a precision instrument. I could actually fulfill all these commissions with my left hand. I didn't get the pleasure I get from painting with my right hand. I didn't get the bliss factor, but technically I could do the painting perfectly well. And you know, people don't realize, the trouble is because it's expensive medium, you never learn watercolor at school because nobody could afford sable brushes and watercolor. But it is a precision, the materials are so perfect that the more you trust them, the better they'll deliver.
Perfect, thank you. And then this one kind of leads off rather nicely from that. It's from Satel, and it says, I love painting animals, but have always painted with oils, as watercolor for me is really hard to use. Have you ever doubted your ability to use watercolor? And how did you overcome this?
I doubt my ability all the time. It's an adrenaline. The reason I love it is because it's a challenge. I will never think I can paint because I'm always trying to push the boat out. Obviously, when I'm demonstrating, I'm probably doing what I think I can do because I don't really want to look like an idiot in front of you all. But when I'm painting for myself, I'm always experimenting. I'm always trying new colors or new ways of doing it. I'm always trying to push the boat out. And I want the challenge. I love the challenge. You know, when it's commissioned, yes, it's got to be done right. But when I'm out there painting on my own, only the elephant's going to see the result. And I don't think he cares. So I'm always experimenting. I always doubt. I doubt it. I live in fear of it, but I love that. It's the greatest adventure you can have without sort of doing bungee jumping and having to jump out of a plane or something like that. You know.
Okay, and I mean, I wish that we had put another hour on this because the amount of questions, I would wish I could read all these comments to you. But just so final one, I'm just gonna, which is more about actually painting in the field. It's from Sharon, just saying, do you have a ranger with you, or are you always solo? Have you ever had any close calls, and how relaxed are the animals with you?
I've had close calls, and I have learnt my lesson because I've had close calls with baboons who've taken my bag, and I have chased after because I did not want my sable brushes and my paints being taken, and I grabbed the bag back and a baboon was not happy. I learned that because they will drop them later, but I didn't know that then. I thought I'd lost my bag forever. And so anyway, and I've had close encounters with elephants where I've been, where the elephant has actually nudged the vehicle because she, because it was a matriarch, didn't like me being amidst the herd. But I always kowtow. With baboons, sadly, you have to kowtow, you have to sort of bow down to the male. with elephants, you just sit very quietly and just don't be threatening. And I won't move even. I mean, I will stop painting often and just sit. I have often I'm on my own painting, but I'm probably more sensible now, in the sense that I think animals are getting slightly more aggressive than they were in the 80s and 90s, because I think there's many tourists, and some tourists are not treating them with respect. They might honk at elephants where they never used to do that in the past. So I have become a little bit more wary, certainly of elephants in particular. But I'm always ready. My windows are up near lions. I can paint through windows. I'm careful, but I remember that when I had a really nasty encounter. Well, it wasn't nasty because I actually found it quite thrilling, but it was quite dangerous encounter in an elephant herd. I actually thought, if this is the way I'm going to go, it's the way I want to
go. And then this is last question, and I think you kind of just answered it there. But why do you choose wildlife as your kind of one of your main reference points? What is it that kind of attracts you to painting in watercolor and using wildlife?
Well, everybody watching must be loving wildlife, because they're on a David Shepherd Conservation Foundation website event. Who couldn't love this? I think everyone watching can answer that.
Perfect. Well, Hazel, thank you so much. I just wanted to say thank you actually to everyone for joining this event tonight, but Hazel, especially to you. And as I've reiterated on several occasions, I wish we had another hour. But just as a really quick one from us, our virtual gallery for the Wildlife Artist of the Year competition is open to the public until the 28th. So some stuff is going to pop up on the screen now with some website links and some QR codes which you can scan, taking you both to Wildlife Artist of the Year, but also onto the David Shepherd website, where you can look at some of Hazel's amazing work as well. So yeah, that's just the last thing from me. Is just, Hazel, thank you so much for giving us an hour and a half of your time today, and just for everything that you do for the foundation. We really appreciate it, and I hope everyone has a lovely evening.